Buenos días desde Buenos
Good
Aires,
morning
Argentina. Hoy tenemos un
from
día
Buenos
muy
Aires,
primaveral, así
Argentina.
que
Let me tell you that we have springtime here, so I dress for the occasion. Thank you for being here during the last or the second day of the South School of Internet Governance conference. We're going to start with a very important issue. We had everything working up and running yesterday. Thank you to thanks to the technical team, and thanks to the rest of the internet that was never down. We could continue with our operations with the conference despite some of the social media like Facebook or Instagram that were down. So social media is not the same as the internet. It's good for network neutrality that we're going to discuss later on. Now, the motto of these 5 days is the internet as an element for economic recovery. You know, that impacted the economy, society, so we understand or we see that internet could recover the economy after COVID. And we have a panel that is going to discuss digital inclusion. What are the gaps or what is the divide that was witnessed during the pandemic? And it was made visible or we raised awareness for how people were connected through their homes. At one point, we thought that the internet was going to go down or was going to have problems. However, it was very solid and very robust and was able to cope with all the transmission. So we have a very good panel for today. We have Sergio Martínez that is coming for Colombia, that is the Executive Director of the CRC. And also Martín Olmos is here with us today, Secretary of the ICT of the Gabinete Minister in Argentina. Let's welcome you to the South School on Internet Governance. I would like to welcome you to this session. I know that you have very busy days, so I thank you for your time, for your dedication. We have interns and students from across the world, Latin America, and also in Argentina here. We have simultaneous interpretation into English and into Spanish. Good, Martin, right now I see you. Good morning. Morning. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. It is a pleasure to address my talk here. Thank you for your time, Martin. Let me tell you that we have 500 students, mainly from Latin America and also from across the world, and we have simultaneous translation into Spanish and into English of all the sessions. I would like to acknowledge both of the interpreters, Rafaela, Martin, and Tatiana, that are helping us with the translation. You can switch into the language of your choice. Now, I will give the floor to Sergio. Sergio, are you there? No. So, okay, Martin, you can start. Right? Martin, morning. Spring is back. It's kind of warm after cold and showers and rain. You know, October is a nice time of the year. As I told you, we experienced many things over the last year and a half during the pandemic of doing remote work, teaching, e-learning. As a matter of fact, I teach at the University of Buenos Aires, and we are aware of the digital divide or the gaps that we have identified. What are the challenges that we're faced with and these gaps that we were able to identify during the pandemic, and what can we think or how can we go about and solve this thinking of the future? Thanks. I would like to greet all the students from the South School of Internet Governance. I know that you've been organizing this forum that is very good, discussing one of the most relevant topics on internet governance. For me, it is a great pleasure and honor to be here and to take part in the panels here. As Olga well said, we have digital divides that persist throughout time. Some of them date back to some time ago, some of them are reshaped. And let me tell you that Argentina has salient features because it has a lot of extension with its territory. It's the 8th largest country. It has an equal population distribution, highly concentrated in 4 or 5 major metropolitan areas, with thousands of localities and municipalities, small and medium-sized towns or cities with less than 40 or 50,000 people. And given this low population density and the socioeconomic gaps in the population, challenge the deployment of connectivity infrastructure. Because in these locations, or remote locations, we don't have enough incentives to have the necessary investment to develop or deploy the necessary infrastructure to have effective connectivity. So all these locations throughout Argentina sometimes cannot leave the situation where they are in, and sometimes they cannot be fully developed in terms of connectivity. We believe that the role played by the public sector is key in this endeavor, in developing the infrastructure with public works to improve connectivity, and this is what I'm going to address. And considering also, I would like to speak on through different dimensions. It's not an issue of service coverage. Indeed, I don't know if you're aware of this, but half of the world's population does not have connectivity access, but the gap does not lie in coverage, but in security, because a large proportion of those that do not have access is not because they don't have coverage or connectivity technology, because sometimes they resort to mobile devices, but because they cannot afford those services, so they don't have the necessary skills, or they are not technologically adapt to use some of these applications. So this technology gap is very, very complex. On the one hand, we have access to services where this requires inclusion policies in order to develop the necessary know-how or skills, especially in those populations that do not have these technology-wise skills. And also, access is key, and affordability also, because they need to be able to pay for that, for the service and for that connectivity. So we've been working within the framework of the Conectar plan, and we're working with satellite developments. We are building a new satellite within Arasat that is going to provide broadband services with a high-performance satellite that is going to be launched, providing broadband here in Argentina, the objective of which is to provide connectivity to those remote locations that we cannot cover with terrestrial technologies. And those remote locations are many in Argentina because of the extension of this country and also because of the varied geographies that we have. In fact, we are trying to strengthen our fiber optic network. We are investing in network capacity and to extend it to other remote locations. The investment plan for the next 2 years, as a matter of fact, is going to go from 1,100 localities to 1,360 localities. And we are investing in open network TV, in promoting cloud services. Yesterday, Micaela Sanchez-Malcolm was speaking of the G+T Center. She works at the Innovation Secretariat. We have been working in gender-based gaps, technology training, some grants that are being given in the public and in the private sector to develop these skills in people where we find this large divide, digital divide. Public policy that we have been promoting from the Innovation Secretariat is the Digital Point Program. Cesar Sargasso, as a matter of fact, with his secretariat, is responsible for these initiatives. This is driven by the public sector together with the municipalities, where we create the space, and then the national government provides the equipment, and then connectivity and some training programs with many classes imparted on skills, digital skills development. And these are some of the initiatives that we've been conducting. As a matter of fact, these are not one-size-fits-all solutions. It's not a magic solution, as we said before, but I believe that we're heading towards a common goal with the right decision. Obviously, the pandemic, as Olga said at the very beginning, explained the urgency and how and raise awareness of the digital divide that we've been in. However, the pandemic hit these sectors of society, and they were required to use the internet and remote working more intensively and consume digital services to have access to health, education, remote working, and things like that. So the challenge that lies ahead of us is very, very significant. I don't know if I'm on time, Olga, but at least these are some of the initiatives. And I believe that Sergio is already connected and is already on.
Thank you. That was very interesting what you were saying about affordability. Last year, the Secretary of ICLAC talked to us about the impact of the payment of internet access services for people who were from the lower, middle, and top income bracket. And obviously, for those of a low income bracket, the impact was far greater. So it's interesting to hear about this issue of the affordability because it is extremely relevant. I understand that the Argentine government has plans to introduce a lower payment scheme for this segment of the population, which is otherwise unable to access these plans. So later, I'd like to ask you to tell us more about this. We have people connected from India, would you believe it? I'm getting questions. I have a question for you. What is the greatest challenge in setting up digital connectivity points, places where people can connect, hotspots? And here we are accompanied by Sergio. Welcome, Sergio. Sergio Martínez is the Executive Director of the Colombian Communications Regulatory Commission. He joined us yesterday, and today he's also talking to us from Bogota. As I was saying to Martín earlier, the general issue this year is how internet can help with the economic recovery post-COVID-19, particularly in Latin America. But we do have interns from all over the world and simultaneous translation. The idea about this panel is to talk about digital inclusion and look at these new gaps that appeared or became more evident during the year and a half of lockdown and restrictions, where people had to study and work from home and had to tackle a number of limitations which have become more evident in this situation. Sergio, welcome. Over to you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for your greetings, and indeed a big greeting to everybody here, the interns and other people who are so interested in these debates and our reflections about connectivity and the role played by telecommunications in the economic recovery, the social recovery as well, and even cultural things that we have to do to offset the effects of COVID-19. I think it's very important that we can all come together to work on a different kind of an agenda. The work of the national regulatory entities has to focus on what happened because it was really a very disruptive and unexpected change. It will be remembered as one of the great events in world history, and it means that we have to change the way that we approach solutions to different problems posed by internet, access to internet, particularly on our continent. The countries of Latin America still have many regions and areas which do not benefit from connectivity. We have one of the highest levels of social inequality in the world, and the only way to close the gap is through technology. We have to appropriate ourselves of the fourth industrial revolution, which is the internet revolution, and this is the only way of bringing on board the countries that have such high levels of inequality. I think it's a key opportunity for the region as a whole and also for the younger generations, of future generations, as well as we who are present today. So here's my presentation. This is where I'm going to be talking to you about the challenges. It is necessary to develop new digital inclusion motors, which is very important for development. The most important thing to highlight is how the whole business of devices has developed in the world. There has been a huge progress in devices connected. Yesterday, we all were victims of the problem with the social networks. We are in a world ecosystem. We are interconnected. People are connected between each other. Europe, Argentina, Colombia had an impact everywhere. But yesterday, it wasn't a particularly complex issue, but it affected millions and billions of people who connect on social networks every day. It's very important for us to include that when we look towards the future. We are also taking that approach when it comes to working on solutions to develop a clear strategy for quality, for broader services. I think it's very important to be aware of the psychology of the consumer so that we develop these issues in the right way. How do we work on the relationship between citizenry and internet? These are just some of the advances that we have achieved thanks to the pandemic. Information, which is so relevant, the need to provide a medium for people to be have solidarity with each other. And what is most important is quality and clear information. One thing we've learned over the last few months is that it's very, very important to be able to see what's happening. We cannot abstract ourselves from what has happened. I give you an example of Colombia. I always tell my colleagues that it would be very difficult to educate Colombians after the pandemic to stand in line to access public services, to ask for a health appointment, or to do any kind of procedures. So I think we need to have that sort of overlook. What is our problem? This is the focus. I know you'll be looking at this from different perspectives over the next few days, but I did want to focus on a problem which is extremely relevant and has everything to do with internet. We cannot hold these debates about content and information transparency. We can't hold all of these debates without a clear perspective of a key issue, which is affecting us in Colombia, which is how we take connectivity throughout the region. This is information that we get from different private and public associations who have given us an approximation of what is happening in Colombia in terms of infrastructure. Why is infrastructure deployment so important? Because otherwise we won't be able to close the digital gap. We need to think of the next generations, the next kind of connectivity which will apply. We need to look to the US and Europe, who are already deploying these new systems, and we are being left behind. Now, if we don't talk about connectivity, we're going to find it very difficult to transmit the data required to bring about the revolution we need in public administration. Colombia is a country which has high levels of inefficiency in the state structures. We have lots of problems with corruption and inefficiency. And the only way to overcome these is with the data revolution, which will allow public administrators to take better decisions and for citizens to take better decisions and to ensure the better use of public resources. So I think that it's very important that we start by talking about infrastructure deployment. As Martín said, we need to talk about this in the context of closing the digital divide, because we cannot provide otherwise a unified vision of all the contexts. I'm very interested in the deployment in urban areas, because 90% of Colombians in the next 10 years will be living in cities. So these have to become smart cities. We have to be able to control climate change. We need secure, safe cities. We have to have cities that are about safe places for their citizens, where transport becomes easier and mobility is guaranteed. I was thinking about this business of standing in line, going back to in-person appointment to the doctor to get your prescriptions. Nowadays they send them by WhatsApp. And lots of other things are virtual too. You can have video consults with the doctors now. Often we just sit down, we tell them what's wrong, and they tell us what analyses we need to do. I don't know if we've learned our lessons yet, but now that people are keen to return to in-person contact, I think there are things that we need to change about how we do this. We have a few minutes for questions. A question for Sergio. How have we seen new gaps in terms of digital inclusion during COVID-19, and what lessons have we learned? Then there is a general question from Uruguay, who's very interested in the issue of digital inclusion and is asking about public policies for the digital inclusion of older people to allow economic development from a point of view of virtuality. Also asking about the challenges of setting up these new hotspots, tech hubs for digital inclusion.
No sé, Sergio, quizá la pregunta para ti es de qué manera se manifestaron estos gaps.
Sergio, how have these gaps been seen and what are you doing about them? Yes, in Colombia, what you say is very important. There is a transformation at level of connectivity, which is getting underway, and digital appropriation. We're having several important surveys done, and we're seeing that Colombians are moving into the second stage of digital appropriation. The first was about emails, or people seeing the news, or the social networks. But the second stage is when people have training, when they have financial inclusion, when the other processes are involved. And there are very interesting results which show us that in Bogota, we went from having to 10, 15 to 60% of the citizens involved in that second level, and moving on to the third level, the fourth level, which now involves much deeper digital involvement. I think that that is important because traditionally in these countries, I don't know if it's the same in other parts of South America or throughout the region, but we are focusing on a fairly light layer to carry out a process of insertion and digital transformation. I was talking about connectivity, but actually it's as important to ensure that the connectivity is accompanied by digital appropriation for citizens, because if we don't do that, it's going to be very difficult to achieve transformation. That's why I gave you this example of people standing in line, because it's really important to ensure that our governors and the public sector deploy the right kind of agenda over the next few years to achieve digital government. It would be otherwise very frustrating after the pandemic for us not to make important progress when it comes to digital governance, remote working. So I think that we are seeing advances, and there has been an increase in fixed connections, and mobile internet penetration is increasing. We reached nearly 80% of mobile internet through 4G. These are very positive results, but we are most concerned about those Colombians who still don't have access to internet or live in those areas where the signal is very poor, or those who live in urban areas are but live in very vulnerable communities and are very low income, so they can't pay for permanent services. I think that this is the kind of approach we should be taking in terms of digital social policies. Well, I certainly hope that we have learned these lessons. I think that there are many things that are going back to being in person. And I think that this is where we should have learned a few lessons, because we should be able to mix, like remote working. I know that some things do have to be in person and others should be hybrid. Anyway, we'll see over the next few months. Martín, I wanted to ask you something about this question from Uruguay. I've seen ads for some programs for seniors, which the government is driving. I don't know if the Undersecretary of Micaela Malcolm is involved with this. I don't know specifically what plan you're talking about. There is an accessibility program, then we have a universal assistance program. Which offers basic services. It's kind of like a card. You get a certain number of minutes with different companies and a number of free text messages, and then you have free browsing for the government's websites and all educational websites, as well as public university. And then, free access to different kinds of messaging services. And there are some very economic packages around with 1G of data. So that handles the issue of affordability. We're working with these tech hubs as well to tackle the business of the divide. I found the numbers that Sergio mentioned very interesting about digital appropriation. To build, and we need to build an information base, because in Argentina we don't have any surveys, or at least we're not generating any data about digital appropriation. We're working now in response to the needs brought up by the pandemic to develop a series of surveys on digital appropriation, and we have some data and some surveys on access to internet, but little information in terms of the number of homes. Obviously, we have the National Census Index, Statistics Index, but we do really need a better information base to cover issues such as digital appropriation, so that this can nourish our public policy making. Thank you, Martín. We don't have any more time, but we do have tons of questions. There's a question about a connectivity map. We did an earlier course when it was a 7-week course for our interns, and there was a map of the UTI, ITU, which showed this map of connectivity around the world. Is there inclusion for those who are auditively impaired? And not only for them, obviously, but there needs to be special connectivity with subtitles, and also those who are visually impaired. There are other panels which will be covering that during this week. Obviously, there are greetings from everywhere. Martín, are there any provincial initiatives underway? Or is this a federal approach? Do provinces have some initiatives? We have some people here yesterday from Córdoba who were talking about initiatives that apply solely to that province. There are lots of provincial initiatives, but actually this is something that we need to tackle from all government levels because the challenge is so significant. Otherwise, we won't be able to overcome it. Okay, yes, of course. It's the geography is complicated throughout the region. In fact, this is a region with a very diverse geography. Well, we have to end here. We have no more time. Thank you very much for being with us. We're going to be here all week. We have simultaneous translation, and perhaps it would be really good if people from your teams could follow us during the week. Thank you very much for joining us. And greetings from our team. Adrián is saying hi to Sergio Martín. Thank you. Thank you. Okay then. Bye. Okay, folks, we have a few minutes until the next presentation, which is very interesting, and we have a couple of very interesting panelists. We have Pablo, who is from Mercado Libre, and Jimena Morena, who is from CIDE in Mexico, and Paula Restrepa will be our moderator. We'll be back in 10 minutes.